problem.
Hello, and here we are today talking to, or rather here I am today, talking to Eileen Taylor. Hello, Eileen.
Hello, Guy.
Eileen's from GoLexia, the South Wales Dyslexia Service, and Eileen is going to, I hope, answer my questions about what is involved in a diagnostic assessment for dyslexia, because a lot of people don't know, and they therefore find it hard to decide, should they have one, should they not have one, what can they expect, how will it help them? So my first question, therefore, to our resident expert, and Eileen does dyslexia assessments till they are coming out of her ears and has been doing them consistently for a decade plus, I guess.
Yeah.
So if anyone should know the answer to these questions, it is Eileen. So tell us, Eileen, what's involved in a diagnostic assessment for dyslexia?
Quite a lot more than people think. Many people think dyslexia is just about difficulties with reading and spelling. Actually, as you know, Guy, it's not that at all. It's a different way that your brain deals with things, which often manifests in problems with reading and spelling, but also with a lot of other things. And when we are talking to somebody about a diagnostic assessment, we have to explain what the process entails and how long it's going to take. It takes several hours. We will look at the background information of somebody. We'll look at everything that we can find out from birth, because there are signs really from when a child is very, very young that there may be future issues. For example, if a child is late learning to talk, that can be an indicator. It doesn't mean that it is, but it can be. So we gather background information about the birth, about developmental milestones like crawling, walking, talking. Have they ever had problems with coordination? So feeding themselves, doing up zips and buttons and shoelaces, riding a bike. We'll look at, have they had an eyesight test recently? Have they got any hearing issues? So we're looking at all the background reasons for the issues that they are at the point of assessment are experiencing. So that forms the basis of the assessment, so that you already know before you meet the person what experiences they've had throughout their lives. Even when we're assessing children, the parents will fill in information about what support of school put into place, what issues are they facing in school. Where possible, we like to get information from the school about what they feel, although that isn't always as easy as it seems. Once we got all that information and we have an appointment to do an assessment, we would then, first of all, meet and greet and put the person at ease, because a lot of people turn up to an assessment very nervous, not knowing what to expect because nobody else has been able to tell them. But even if you do say, I will be assessing this, 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 and this, they still don't quite understand or realize how intensive it can be and how exhausting it can be. So what we try to do is to, first of all, develop some rapport with the person. And throughout the assessment, that means then we can say, oh, let's take a little break and have a chat about such and such. Because, as I said, it's quite intensive. So we try to explain that we are testing, but we don't expect pass or fail. We are not looking for pass or fail. There's no such thing in these assessments. We're looking for evidence of what is happening. We do assess underlying ability in terms of, are they better at working things out by looking at them or by using words? Some people are better at one than the other. Some people are just the same. But we need to establish that so that we know that underlying ability is not the root cause of the difficulties they're experiencing. Then, yes, we do assessments on reading, on spelling, but we also test memory, working memory, attention and concentration. Very importantly, we test phonology, which is the sounds in words. So we have to do a test where we're asking them to take words apart or to isolate a sound within a word. And that can get very confusing for adults, I'd say over the age of about 25, because they have not been taught in this way when they were learning to read and write. Whereas younger than that, thank goodness, people have been taught structured sequential phonics programs, so they do understand it a bit more. But this is something that a lot of dyslexic people find very difficult, to be able to pull words apart in their head just by hearing what you've said and putting them back together again. This can be very difficult. So that's a very important component of the assessment. We're looking at processing speed as well. So how long it takes for your eyes to tell your brain what they're reading in terms of numbers and letters. We'll do a test about copying, so visual tracking, because for a lot of people, they'll look at what they're supposed to write down, and by the time they look at the place where they've got to write it, they can't remember what they just looked at. And that tells another story, but it's all part of the assessment. So all of those things together are what make up an assessment. But as we're always told by the people who award our APC, an assessment is not about testing, it's about a person. So the testing is for us to gather the evidence to support the information about the person that we know, the background information. And that then all gets put together in a very long report so that we can say, this is the person, these are the issues they're facing, these are the reasons why.
Golly, that's quite a lot, isn't it, for
Yes.
someone to take in? And I guess, what's the youngest age that you would do a dyslexia assessment on?
Usually not less than 7.
Right.
Simply because, you know, there are people who are not dyslexic, but take a while to assimilate the mechanics of literacy. So you have to give them a chance to do that. But when I do have people who contact me with a 6-year-old, I will often send them the background information checklist and ask them to fill that in, because that then gives me a clue as to what other issues there might be. When you're talking to someone who rings up to say, I want my child assessed, do you do it? He's only 6. They very often miss what I would consider crucial information, because they're not aware that it's got anything to do with dyslexia. And so the checklist often will open their eyes to, oh yes, this happens or that happens. And oh, he's always bumping into things and dropping things and walking into the door. I didn't realize that was a problem. And it might not be a problem, but we need to know. If the child is less than 7, I will then say, well, can you tell me what the school are saying about progress? And often the school are saying, don't worry about it, he or she will grow out of it, it will get better, it'll be all right when they're in year 3, which may well be true, but it's also something to keep an eye on. Specifically, I think if in the background information, if they're sharing the information that somebody in the close family also has similar problems, so a parent, a sibling, an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, a grandparent, if they know that any of those have had problems, that's a bit of a flag that it's because it's genetic, it might be in the family. Keep an eye on it.
That's an important point, isn't it? And a useful indicator. And I know a lot of people that I meet have who are adults in the workplace who have had an assessment, a diagnostic assessment for dyslexia, they often mention other members of their family who have similarly had an assessment, or for some of the older people, they mention it to their parents, who at first have no kind of knowledge or understanding, but once they start talking about all the characteristics, it's not just reading and writing, that stuff you mentioned about memory and information processing, then often it's kind of understood that those, then suddenly the secrets come out. Oh yeah, that's why your dad never wrote anything down, kind of thing.
Absolutely. And I think the thing with older generations is that it was seen as shameful.
Yes.
For example, I assessed a lady last week who is coming up to 60. She had a horrific experience at school where she was made to feel ashamed. She was humiliated. Every day after assembly, the head teacher would come over to where she was in her line and shout, "Spell Constantinople." And at the age of 5, who could anyway? But she had a horrifying experience at school, and that has stayed with her. She's been very determined. She's had a successful life. She's now embarked on a degree in psychology, which is why she needed to be assessed. So she was able to take that awful experience, and through therapy and working on it herself, she's dealt with it. But this is why people don't tell others, because they were made to feel stupid at school, and as if it was their fault. So we often have to work with somebody quite intensively to make them come to the realization that there's nothing they can do about this. This is something that is neurodiverse. It's genetic in nature. There is genome research going on as to how to identify the dyslexia gene, although I'm not sure what will come out of that, because everyone I've spoken to who's been asked if you could have your child without dyslexia, would you? Every one of them has said no way, because of the advantages that dyslexia brings to some people and because of the person it makes them. But yes, a lot of people, when they fill in the background checklist, light bulbs go on about, oh my word, yes, as you said, that's why, Grandad became a carpenter and he didn't write anything down. He kept it all in his head, and got grandma to do his accounts, or, make the invoices or whatever.
So, and I guess there are 3 groups of people that you do assessments with. There's the school population, there's students, and then there's people in work. So is it what is the value of the assessment? What does it, because it's quite I don't want to use the word ordeal, but I know it takes a lot of, it takes several hours, doesn't it? It's hard work. You have to, if you're the person being assessed, I think it can be quite draining. So it's not like a qualification kind of thing. It's so it's stressful and hard work. So once you've got that understanding, what do you do with it?
If this is for a person who's of school age, then the parents should share the report with the additional needs coordinator and ask for an appointment once they've read it, an appointment to talk about the way forward, because there is provision for support. Schools, as you know, manage their own budgets. Support might be one-to-one. It might be in the form of additional time in exams, sitting the exams in a separate room where the student can vocalize their answers before they write them down. There are lots of reasonable adjustments which are a legal requirement once a diagnosis is made. So once someone has diagnosed a pupil at a school with dyslexia, the Equality Act 2010 states that the education authority must make provision for that person in terms of reasonable adjustments. Schools can find this very difficult because it's going to affect their budget, it's going to affect the way things are done. However, it's a legal requirement. If the person's at university, they can get masses more help because there is a funding body, Student Finance, which has a branch, if you like, which administers what are called disabled student allowances, DSA. And it sounds horrible. The word disabled is not the best. However, dyslexia is recognised by the World Health Organization as a disability because it affects the whole of your life, every aspect of your life, and you don't recover from it. It's not like chickenpox. So a student, once they've got their report, would complete the disabled student allowance form. There's a section where it says, what's your disability? They simply have to put the word dyslexia, attach a copy of the report, and send that off to Student Finance. They will then ask the student to get a needs assessment, at which point the student thinks, I've just been assessed, what do you mean? Well, a needs assessment is where someone has a copy of our report, they look at the things we found out, and they talk to the student about, okay, Eileen says you have problems remembering what you've just read and you have to read it several times. Here's a program that will read to you. Do you think that would help? So they work out what things will help, and they put together a report with costings, which gets sent to Student Finance to say, this student's dyslexic, you have the evidence, here's what they need. And then Student Finance, they look at several different kind of costings and choose the most appropriate, and then contact the student to say, where do you want it delivered? So they can have programs that might read to them or take dictation, programs that do special spell checking, mind mapping. There are lots of different ways of supporting the student. Universities can, once they get the diagnosis, they can instantly put into place extra time in exams and a study skills tutor who will help the student. They're allowed an hour for every week of the student year, which is 36 hours. And they work with that person to help look at, how do you plan what your assignment's going to look like? How do you unpick what the question is? Because the question's not one line, it's usually half a page. How do you determine what the lecturer wants from this? So the study skills tutor will work with the student every week to plan, to help them through writing the assignments. They can't write the assignments for them, but they can help them with proofreading and referencing. So they get a huge amount of help at higher education. Sadly, not at further education unless their course is going to lead to a degree that is validated by a university. So that's students. People in the workplace, as I might have alluded to before, there's part of a branch of the Job Centre called Access to Work. And they can provide funding not only for people to be assessed, but also for reasonable adjustments to put into place. So the Human Resources Department, together with the Occupational Health Department, can apply to Access to Work and say, right, this person's being diagnosed. We want a workplace needs assessment where a person like yourself sits with the employee and talks about how their dyslexia affects the way they do their job. What are the pressure points? What are the issues that they come up against, and works out what things might help. And they can be programs for reading and writing, they can be mind mapping software, but they can also be a coaching session or several coaching sessions where you unpick how to deal with this aspect. So I've got a problem with this. Let's work on how we can approach it and who can do something about it. So in some of the coaching sessions I've done, there have been elements where the problem is not with the employee, the problem is getting the manager to understand when you've got your headphones on, you're obviously concentrating on listening to something that you're reading. The manager needs to be trained not to come up and tap you on the shoulder and expect you to stop and then get back to where you were before when they just told you to do something else. So sometimes the issue is with other people. So we look at how can we deal with it? What words can we say to them? Could we write down a little script and hand it to them and say, when I have my headphones on, this is what's happening. I cannot then be interrupted. Could you please wait? And so the workplace have a lot of responsibility, again, because the law says you have to put this into place. And a lot of the funding can come from access to work, but we also need the willingness of the employer to be on board with making the workplace as neurodiverse as possible and as supportive as possible.
It shows, doesn't it, that there's a lot of value in having an assessment, and because I guess not only does it give you your kind of legal status whereby you can get support, but also going back to right at the beginning of what you said about the background to it, by looking at it in the context of your whole life, isn't it? It's, you can make sense of the issues and start to think about how to manage them most effectively. It's not you being stupid, lazy, or crazy. It's a thing that needs to be understood, doesn't it? You don't want to be defined by it exclusively, but you need to understand the thing with, you know, the memory thing. That could be complicated because people, certainly in schools, are constantly dishing out streams of instructions, and if you know that you can't do that, then you won't beat yourself up about it because you feel you're being a failure at it. If it's just something you can't do, like being the fastest runner, you can understand it, can't you? And then that can make you focus on your strengths and get on with life and build self-confidence, which is the key thing, isn't it, for all of us, I guess, but often lacks.
I think the other thing is that because, as you know, it's a hidden disability, it's not something that people can look at you and see that you've got. And like, for example, you look at me, I'm wearing my glasses, I've obviously got a problem with my eyesight. That's very obvious. And so because people can't see it, they tend to dismiss or maybe just not understand it properly.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that's a good point to end, because we've had so much information that is really useful. And my dog in the background is getting a bit restless, so there's only so long she can be quiet, bless her. So I have to say thank you ever so much, Eileen, for all that really useful information. And I think it'd be really helpful for people watching this to help them understand what to expect, the benefits of the assessment, what to think about in advance, and the fact that if you are struggling at school, at university, or in work, and you think it's dyslexia, it's worth exploring. And I guess if they contact GoLexia, they can have a chat about it, and you know, and that will help them understand the process, or use conventional channels of email and all the other stuff, social media that exists. So thank you hugely, Eileen, for telling us all that fascinating and useful stuff. And I think you need to have a cup of tea now after that. And no doubt you've got several reports to write and work to get on with. So I shall say thank you very much. And
thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks, Sen. Thank you for taking the time to watch today's video. If you found this video useful, then why not take a look at this one? I'll see you in my next video. Bye for now.